So there was extremely long lines at the Georgia polling places on yesterday's primary elections, and it's leading to claims of voter suppression. The voter suppression, it has been going on since the 1800s, especially in the South. And the whole idea is to try to make it difficult for people, for minorities to vote, therefore reducing their votes and therefore keeping others in power, which would be the Republicans, who are not generally being elected by minorities and working class. Now, thousands of voters in Georgia participated in Tuesday's primary elections, but it was huge delays. They had to stand 6 feet apart. We have pictures of lines going blocks and blocks and blocks long. There were defective voting machines across the state, including in Atlanta. Now, Georgia was one of 5 states that held the primary elections Tuesday. Now, states are continuing to hold in-person elections despite the coronavirus pandemic, even as voting rights activists and Democrats in Congress push for more federal investment in mail-in votes. Of course, every time there's a mail-in vote, Donald Trump is going to start yelling, fraud, fraud, fraud. We don't know who's signing these mail-in votes. And it has led to a lot of controversy. Now, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who I am now becoming one of my favorite politicians, called out the Secretary of State on Twitter and urged voters in line to not allow your vote to be suppressed. She was telling people, these votes are important, stand in line. Anita here, an 80-year-old woman, was first in line, and when asked by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution if she would wait hours to vote, she said, of course, I worked for 40 years. Where else am I going? Now, in the end, Joe Biden won Georgia. He picked up more delegates. He also won West Virginia. He is absolutely the Democratic nominee. He clinched it with wins in Georgia and West Virginia on Tuesday night. Now, it's come out that New York cops, when everybody was looking at the pictures of the cops dealing with the protests and the looting and the riots, overwhelmingly, they have been going without masks. So much so that Mayor Bill de Blasio widely criticized for defending the New York City police. They pleaded with them, nevertheless, to follow the rules. The mayor said on Sunday, it's just a human decency thing, even though masks remain optional for officers in the field. And that's really, I'm not a big Bill de Blasio fan, I got to tell you, but he's 100% right. Wearing a mask is human decency. Why is it human decency? Because wearing a mask is generally not going to protect you from getting, if I'm walking around with a mask outside, it's not generally going to protect me from getting coronavirus. What it is I am protecting others, God forbid I'm sick, from getting coronavirus. That's why it's a human decency thing to do. So when people are walking around without masks, they're saying to everybody, F you. I don't care if you get coronavirus or not. Now, across the country, police departments have left it up to individual officers to decide if they're going to wear a mask or not. Now, according to the Huffington Post, analysis of hundreds of videos and photos posted over the past 2 weeks of the protests, they found that the majority of police working the demonstrations are not wearing masks. A survey of the police departments in the country, so that's basically the police saying, F you, I don't care if I'm sick or not, I'm going to get you sick. A survey of police departments in the country's 20 most populous cities found loose guidelines and zero measures to penalize officers who fail to cover their mouth and nose. And this is, again, a basic step that the World Health Organization, that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that you hear it from Dr. Fauci, have recommended to everybody. So who are the people who are not wearing masks? The cops and Trump. Cops and Trump. Those are people not wearing masks. The brother of George Floyd made an emotional plea before the House Judiciary Committee for lawmakers to take action to prevent more deaths at the hands of police officers. We have some video of what Philanese Floyd had to say.
I'm tired of pain. Pain you feel when you watch something like that. When you watch your big brother, who you looked up to for your whole life, die begging for his mom.
The hearing came 2 days after congressional Democrats unveiled the Justice and Policing Act, which would ban chokeholds, establish a national database to track police misconduct, and prohibit certain no-knock warrants, among other initiatives. Now, addressing George directly, he said, "Look at what you did, big brother. You changed the world. Thank you for everything, for taking care of us on Earth, for taking care of us now. I hope you find Mama and you can rest in peace with power. Thank you." And he did change the world, George Floyd. Now, according to a man, this is really interesting because this may change the criminal case as it pertains to Derek Chauvin, the cop who killed George Floyd. Now, according to a man who claims he worked at the same Minneapolis nightclub that once employed George Floyd and his killer, Derek Chauvin, the two men knew each other and at times bumped heads over Chauvin's aggressive handling of the club's patrons. Now, David Pinney told CBS News on Tuesday, "It has a lot to do with Derek being extremely aggressive within the club with some of the patrons, which was an issue. His remarks echo claims made by Floyd's family that George's death was in part very personal." CBS News pressed Pinney on the two men's relationships. Pinney claims Chauvin definitely knew Floyd. "I would say pretty well," he added. Now, Maya Santamaria, the owner of the club, which has been lost to arson now, previously told CBS News that Chauvin allegedly took a different approach on how he treated black patrons. Chauvin worked at the club when he was off duty, usually sitting in his squad car outside the club, and Floyd worked security inside. "And do you think Derek had a problem with black people?" CBS News asked Santamaria, who replied, "I think he was afraid and intimidated." Now, in the last 2 weeks, what has been amazing and how George Floyd changed the world is that American voters' support for the Black Lives Matter movement increased almost as much as it has in the preceding 2 years. Public opinion on race and criminal justice issues, they've been steadily moving left since the first protest ignited over the shootings of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. And since the death of George Floyd in police custody on May 25th, public opinion on race, criminal justice, Black Lives Matter, it has leaped leftward by a 28-point difference. Now, Civics, which did the polling, found that a majority of Americans support Black Lives Movement, up from a 17-point margin before the most recent wave of protests. So by a difference of 28%, Americans now support the Black Lives Movement. Additionally, a Monmouth University poll found that 76% of Americans, 3 out of 4 people, consider racism and discrimination a big problem. And that is up from just about 50% of the voters in 2015. So in 2015, before Donald Trump became president and Barack Obama was president, 1 out of 2 people basically said that racism and discrimination is a big problem in America. Now it is 3 out of 4. Meanwhile, talking about Donald Trump, a former federal judge appointed to review the Justice Department's motion to dismiss charges against Donald Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, has found that the government's request should be denied because it is clear evidence of gross abuse of power by the Trump administration. Former U.S. District Judge John Gleeson said in a filing Wednesday that the government has engaged, and he's talking about the government, this is Trump's government, this is the Department of Justice, has engaged in highly irregular conduct to benefit a political ally of the president. Flynn pleaded guilty as part of a special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation to lying to the FBI about conversations with the Russian ambassador to the United States. In January, Flynn filed court papers to withdraw his guilty plea, saying federal prosecutors had acted in bad faith and broken their end of the bargain. The Justice Department filed a motion last month to dismiss the case, saying the FBI had insufficient basis to question Flynn in the first place and that statements he made during the interview were not material to the broader counterintelligence investigation into ties between Russia and the Trump campaign. The fact of the matter is that the criminal case against Flynn was done properly within the law, and he did plead guilty. And now, because of Porky, U.S. Attorney William Barr, putting pressure on the U.S. attorneys to basically drop the case against Flynn after he pled guilty but hasn't been sentenced yet. Now, meanwhile, it also came out that Don Jr., he went on a very controversial trip to Mongolia for hunting some endangered animals, and it cost the United States $75,000 in taxpayer money because Don had to be followed along by the Secret Service for protection. Now, originally, Don Jr. said it only cost the United States $17,000, but after Crew, the Citizens for Ethics and Responsibility in Washington, uncovered documents in a Freedom of Information Act request, which you hear the Freedom of Information Act request all the time from me, something we do with immigration all the time to get people's records. So they found out the actual cost of what it was that the Secret Service cost for Don Jr. to go hunt endangered animals in Africa. It cost the U.S. government $76,859. It was an 8-day trip, and it was controversial not only because it cost the government $76,000. It was controversial because Trump was hunting endangered animals that he got a special permit that no one else is allowed to hunt this animal but Trump, because they're endangered, because there's not a lot of them left. It's called an Argali sheep, but he already killed the animal, and it didn't matter at that point. And then he had a private meeting with the president of Mongolia, and nobody knows what he talked about. Yet it cost the U.S. government $76,000. Meanwhile, according to statistics from the Johns Hopkins University, there are now over 7.2 million coronavirus cases worldwide. In the United States, more than 2 million people have been diagnosed with corona. America has over 114,000 people who have died. Now, as the number of new coronavirus cases continues to increase worldwide, and more than a dozen states and Puerto Rico are recording their highest averages of new cases since the pandemic began, hospitalizations in at least 9 states have been on the rise since Memorial Day. That includes Texas, North and South Carolina, California, Oregon, Arkansas, Mississippi, Utah, and Arizona. They are all increasing the number of patients under supervised care for coronavirus. Many of these states have experienced an increase in cases, also have an increase in hospitalizations, and a handful of states are nearing bed capacity again. Are we on the cusp of a second wave of coronavirus? It is extraordinarily possible. We don't know yet because, the numbers always lag a little bit. But there are some states like Arizona that they're reaching capacity already. We may be onto a second surge. Why? Because the government opened up. People are walking around. People are protesting. Cops are not wearing masks. Protesters may or may not be wearing masks. And a lot of people are congregating, certainly not wearing masks. And as a result, numbers are increasing.
Thanks for watching. For more Bradshaw Live, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.